Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Viewers Orchid question times, regular Thursday event, if I've got enough questions. I've got enough questions, or I wouldn't be doing it, would I? Now, this is very early in the day for me to be filming something like this, but I want to get out here before it gets hot. Now, you have to bear in mind, last night my fans didn't even turn off, so it's starting to get expensive now. I don't want to see the bill, but you have to bear in mind that meant the fans were two big fans running 24 hours a day. The inlet and the extractor fan were probably on 9 hours yesterday, virtually non-stop. And then you've got the hydrofogger on, virtually non-stop. The whole lot is just on the go all the time. Luckily today would appear to be the last day of this level of heat anyway. I mean, the problem is when it's that warm outside, the inlet and the extractor fan don't work. They do change the air, which I've actually got as part of a question. Well, let's get all the dogs out and bark together, shall we? We'll have a dog barking chorus. Oh, wonderful. It's the only pet that people have that annoys everybody else in the neighbourhood. You know, a parrot doesn't, a cat doesn't, you know, budgie doesn't, goldfish doesn't, dogs do. I've owned dogs a lot of my life. They didn't bark unless there was a reason. They didn't bark for nothing. I think some of them bark because it's daylight and then they bark again because it's not. Anyway, I'm filming early today because I've got to go out. I've got two things to go out and do. I don't want to do either of them because it means going out in the car, which has to park out in the road. I've got no off-road parking at this house. And it's in the sun. So when I open the door, the inside of the car will be the temperature of the core of the earth or the surface of the sun, and I've got to get in it. I really don't like doing that. I'm going to do an orchid trip. Now it depends on how this weather changes because they're threatening some serious thunderous downpours tomorrow. But I don't know when tomorrow. What I'm hoping to do first thing tomorrow morning, and I mean first thing, I mean like about 5 o'clock in the morning when I get up, simply because it'll be cooler. There's a type of orchid I've never seen, and I now know where there are some. It's a bit of a drive, basically because there's a huge expanse of water that gets in the way and I've got to go round it because the car don't float. Well, it might do for a couple of minutes, but it ain't going to make it to the other side, so I've got to go round. But at that time of day, taking pictures and filming of orchids and things, the light is so much better because it's low in the sky. So the light comes in at an angle and lights the plants up. Later in the day, when the sun's high in the sky, the light comes in from above. It doesn't work because virtually all of the flowers are in shadow. So that's a maybe. That depends on weather. But I wouldn't mind getting that done. That's tomorrow. Anyway, today is orchid question time. I've got quite an assortment here today. First one's from Maxine Evans, and it was basically a query on what happens next with Coelogyne nitida in its growth habit, because it's one of those I'll get it out in a minute. It's one of those Coelogynes that puts up a growth, but the spike comes out the top of the growth. Well, the question really is, what happens next? I'll show you. Bearing in mind we had this in bloom. That's light. Need some water. I think that's something else I'm going to have to do today, is water the pots, even though it's not their due day. But they've dried out quicker because of the heat, obviously. Right, the two growths that bloomed are this one and this one. And you can see the shriveled little spikes sticking out of the top. Well, what happens next is it carries on growing and becomes a normal growth. And that's what it does. Now, nitida, strictly speaking, is a cool grower. This grows up near 2,000 metres. It's pretty cool where it comes from. So these leaves are stuck together. I'm just wondering why. They really are stuck as well. Oh, it's all right. I was just wondering whether some sort of insect had got in there. But no, it's all right. It's okay. That's strange, sticky stuff. But anyway, yes, they turn into normal growths. And genuine cool grower And it is said, with the genuine cool growers heading towards the cold growers, these will grow best in the spring and the autumn. They don't do so well in the summer if you've got heat, and effectively they shut down. And it is also said, when I say it is said, they're not my words. I've either read them or heard them from somebody else, and I can't back it up myself. Yeah. It is said that with those cool to cold growers, in the heat they don't grow. If you fertilise them during that time, you can lose roots because they won't use the feed because they're not growing at all. So you need water. You need heavy on the water, but ease right off on the feed during that hottest period with the longest days where they're not happy. It makes sense. Do I do that? No. And I'll go into that in a minute when I get to another plant. But yeah, I mean, mine is a very small plant. There's not much of it. It's only got a few bulbs. These can grow into absolute monsters, but not in height, in width. And the bulbs will pile up on top of each other. You can end up with like a mound. And a good specimen sized plant in bloom is quite a stunning thing to see. Yeah, quite sticky, the leaves on here. So it's probably where there's been blooms above it and the happy sap's dripped on. That does happen. Right, so that's the Coelogyne nitida. That's that one done. It's quite an easy one. Right, the next one is a worry about, I won't say nothing, but a worry about something that isn't really a worry. It's because I've often mentioned the various Dendrobium sections, like the Laelia types. There is a section, Laelia, yeah? And there are 6 main sections in the Dendrobiums. There are loads and loads more, some of which have got one Dendrobium in them. And you'll have never heard of it, and you'd never find it to grow anyway. But there's 6 main sections, which you will have heard of the Dendrobiums that grow in those sections. And the main question is, does the section a Dendrobium's in relate to their care? And that's a real yes and no answer. And I would suggest you don't do that. You go to plant level, individual plant level, because within sections you'll get a cool grower and a warm grower. Well, the care shouldn't be the same, should it? Straight away. So simple little things like that. There are some where the sections do, like the Laelia section, again I'll mention that, that really does dictate the care, because virtually all of those have very, very similar habitats that they come from. Excuse me. But there are some that come from higher elevations than others. Well, they would be a little bit cooler, an area, than the steamy jungle. So there are differences. So you're better off going at plant level. But just to go over them, you've got the Phalaenanthe. It's the Phalaenopsis type. So you're looking at Biggie Bum. Sorry, Pahiopedilums. The Phalaenopsis types. Most people will know that. And most of those that are in that section do have similar care. But there are some real cool growers in there, and there are some that aren't. Because some of them come from up in the Philippines, and the others like down into Australia, northern Australia, quite warm, yeah, and a bit farther south. So they come from different areas, so they're not all the same. That's that one. You've got the spatula section. Some spectacular orchids in there. This is the Antelope Orchids, and again, there's a lot of similarities with the ones in there. They're not popularly grown. You don't come across them very often, and I do wonder why, because the blooms are stunning. I'm not sure whether any of them are fragrant or not. I had a real beauty that I was expecting wonders from, and it just keeled over. So I'm not sure I've got any at all. But that's that section. Then there's a Dendrobium section. And how silly can you get? But nonetheless, there is a section called Dendrobiums that's got Dendrobiums in it. And this is in that section, Friedrichianum. Yeah? The Nobiles are in that section. Yeah? So there's that section. And there's a huge variety of orchids in that section. Therefore a variety of care. So again, the section doesn't dictate. What else have we got then? We got the Callistas. That's the Lindleyi, Jenkinsii, and that Chrysotoxum, that monster I've got that's twice as big as anybody else's. Still wondering whether it is Chrysotoxum, but there's that set. Their care varies, not as great a variation as in some of the other sections, but there are varieties there. Get down to plant level, it makes more sense. Then we've got the Laelia section. Most of those are steamy jungle types, you know, so they're warm growers. They like good humidity. They don't like bright light compared with some of the others. So there's a lot of similarities in that section, but there are some come from higher up. So, you know, we need to know. And then there's the Formosae section, which is the black hair type. They are a strange type because to all intents and purposes when you read up, they sound very similar to the Laetorias, similar sort of environments, but they're not. If you try and grow them like the Laetorias, you might not do so well. The main difference with the black hair type, I think, is buoyancy, what I call bright, fresh air. The main difference. But anyway, that's the 6 main sections. They do not dictate care specifically, only very, very generally. So quite honestly, most people don't take much notice of what section a plant's in. So that's that. That was Susan Cress asked that about the sections. So that's that. And I had to write them down because although some of them I know well, others I don't, as I say, I don't take much notice of them. And then Maureen Hauser, I think that is, Hauser, just asked generally about brassicas. Is there anything special about those? They're in the Oncidium alliance, so yes and no. They too tend to be some of the bigger monsters. I don't know whether I can lean the camera over without it falling, but and also still see what I'm doing. But you're looking at, I presume that's pointing at it, things that sort of size with enormous spikes. So they are up the, I'm going to drop the camera now, they are at the larger end of the Oncidium alliance, plant-wise. And that's a generalisation, but it's not a bad one. They are pretty big. But the plants can be a bit more compact. I mean, that's not a giant, but the individual blooms are giants, but the spike isn't. So there is quite a bit of variety in them. A lot of them have a tendency to climb away. The rhizomes are extended and they will rise up. They are also, I would say, at the brighter end of the Oncidium alliance. They will take more light, and in some cases they need it or they won't bloom very well, if at all, if they get too shady. So they tend to be at the brighter end. They also tend to, as a consequence, have darker coloured leaves because they can take the light, whereas the others will pale very quickly if they get too much light. Whereas the brassicas hang in there with their colour, which normally means they're more light tolerant. Temperature-wise, it's just general orchid temperatures. They don't like getting ridiculously cold in the winter. They might slow up a bit with their growth if it gets too hot, continuously too hot in long days. But apart from that, they're pretty easy going, quite honestly, brassicas. Yeah, so general chat about those. But they are in the Oncidium alliance, so general Oncidium care will do for them, you know. Repot when new growths are growing. They don't like to stay dry for any length of time at all, and when they're in active growth they don't like to dry out. So you need to keep your eye on the, you know, the media that you choose needs to be moisture retentive but capable of drying reasonably quick, which gives you a workload. You know, if you've got moisture retentive media that takes ages and ages to dry out, they're not going to do so well in the winter because they're going to stay wet when it's cooler. That's not so good. So it needs to be able to dry reasonably quickly, but not dry out in a day, unless you want to water it every day. You know, up to you. The smaller ones can do well mounted. The big ones can do well mounted, but you have a job to lift them out. Can you imagine that one on the floor on a mount this big? The plant weighs a ton. Anyway, brassicas. Right, this one I'm adding in as a consequence of what I've said. And what's been going on in here. Now, if I didn't have an inlet and an extractor fan, being a conservatory with the heat I'm getting in here at the moment, that door would stay shut or the heat would get in the house, and I don't want it in the house because that's where I am. I don't want to be that hot. So the door would stay shut. Huge big circulating fans, that would be classed as good airflow. It's not. It's air movement. There's a difference. And that in the main is the difference between artificial environments and the wild. We often refer to, well, why don't all these viruses and pathogens and funguses affect the wild plants? It's because their air doesn't stay the same for any length of time at all. It's always on the move, and it's a different set of air going across the plants all the time. That's the difference between fresh air and recycled air. Recycled air can cause problems because it's limited in its change, therefore all those things we'd rather not have get chance to multiply because they're not getting kicked out and replaced by air that hasn't got them in it to any extent. So they're thin on the ground and don't get much of a chance to get a hold. So air change, air flow is good. Recycled air is not so good, and that's what most of us have to put up with. So when it's warmer in here, my air's changing all the time. It don't happen in the winter. I move it about a bit, but it's the same air. And therein lies the potential for an increase in the things we'd rather not have on our leaf surfaces, which in future will be coated with something to stop that sort of thing happening through the winter. It's no good getting to autumn and thinking, oh, they'll be fine, when there has been proof that perhaps they're not. So we'll be dealing with that. So I decided to add that one in. That's my question for me, for you to hear the answer. Air change is good. Open the flipping window, open the door, change the air, and thin those things out to an extent where they can't do so much, if any, harm, like in the wild. Right, the next one's going to be fun. This was one comment classed as a question, when in fact it's a flipping list. It's not a question. I'm not knocking it, it's good stuff. But it's lots of little questions, which is nice, but all in one comment. And this is Carol Sykes. And it's a question really that most people probably wouldn't bother with, but it could be important for one element of this. She asked about, does the pH need to be different for, say, the Oncidium alliance, the Cattleya alliance, and specifically the Pahiopedilums? The simple answer for the Oncidiums and the Cattleya alliance is probably not. We are supposed to vary our pH so that different nutrients get a go, and then collectively they all get a chance, not necessarily on the same watering. Some nutrients are absorbed best at lower pHs, some at higher pHs. So if you always feed at a higher pH, those ones that need the lower pH are not going to get much of a chance, are they? Which could lead to deficiencies, because you might have a nice balanced fertiliser, but if some of the elements don't get much of a go, it's not balanced anymore, is it? So that's why I swap the pH, high and low. Swing high, swing low, all that sort of stuff. And that seems to work okay and gives all of the nutrients a chance. Yeah. Not so good in the winter when I'm possibly only watering every 10, 12 days. Because the chance of the next set having a go at a different pH is a long way off. But then they're not growing much. So that's not so bad. So that's that. But with the Pahiopedilums, you've got types. There are those that are classed as lime lovers. This is where you add your oyster shells and what else? Various things to raise the pH of the media, because that's where they grow. They grow in places where the water is running across limestone type rocky areas and gets a high pH as it's going along. So they're used to a much higher pH than a lot of other orchids, and they need it. So you have to make adjustments. There are also some Pahiopedilums that grow in the leaf litter on the forest floor. They don't need it. They need a more acidic pH, what you would call a normal orchid pH. So you need to know the difference really. But yes, there are differences when you come to the Pahiopedilums. I don't know of others, but there are some out there, I'm sure. But that's the one that specifically springs to mind, that it is said needs a higher pH than most of the other orchids. How high? I'd have to look into it. I don't grow the things, I've got 3. I'm not making special arrangements for 3. So that's that. Right. Next question is easy. Do I store pH buffers? You can get pH up and pH down, pH buffers. Do I store them? I don't own any. So no, I don't store them, simply because I haven't got any. My pH up is bicarbonate of soda, yeah, baking soda. That's what I use for pH up. My pH down is citric acid granules dissolved in a very mild solution in water, which I just add, and that lowers the pH. If you want to lower your pH drastically, add a little bit of seaweed extract, which means you're then using something that's useful for your orchids, but it will rocket that pH downwards naturally. So that's not a bad way. If you've got, when you mix up your feed, when you've done it, if your pH is whatever, 6.7, 6.8, and you want to lower it a bit, knock a bit of seaweed in there now and again, and that will drop it right down. A suitable amount of my seaweed extract in a normal feed, which would be at about 6.4, 6.5. If I put a reasonable amount of seaweed in that's going to do any good at all, my pH goes down to right at the bottom of the 5s, 5.1, 5.2, and I have to bring it back up again. So that's that. So no, I don't store buffers. Have I ever used oyster grit? No. But I know some that do. The problem with grit is it depends on the sizes. If these pieces are quite large and it's not crushed very well, you can pour an awful lot of water over that and it won't make a blind bit of difference. The smaller the pieces, the more likely some is to dissolve, and a powder would be even better. So it might be worth taking some of your grit and actually crush it right down into a powder and use a mix. But I don't use it. Right, next question is a question that I have an answer that I should give you and an answer that I will give you. My Laelia purpurata, as shown in yesterday's, what do you call it? Project Orchids, part 3, I'll get there in a minute. Plus we looked at it not that long ago, and it's in its dormant state, it's not growing. So the new growths haven't started, roots aren't doing much at all, and it's done its blooming a while ago. So it's not really growing at the moment, and the question is direct. Am I feeding it? The answer I should give is of course not, it's not growing. The answer I'm going to give you is yes, because I'm not separating that plant out from all the others. When I water the holy clay pots, they all get the same. So they either get a flush or they get a feed. And they get that pH or they get that pH. And they might get that additive, but they all get it. I haven't got the time to have subsets of sets. Holy clay pots are a set for me. They all get watered together with the same thing at the same time. I can't have a subset, of those that don't really need any feed at the moment because they're not doing much. If I pour it in there and they don't want it, they won't use it, which could mean it might build up in the pots because it's not getting used. That's my risk. So the answer I should give is, of course, I'm not feeding it. The answer I'm going to give you is yes, I am. Right, and the next question is for the same plant. Will I be repotting it? Simple answer is I'm going to be doing something with it. My thoughts at the moment are to ease it out of the pot as best I can once I see new roots growing. That will be associated with the 2 new growths when they come up. What I'm thinking of doing is getting as many of those roots to ease back up through the holes as I can, lift it out in its entirety, and the back part of the pot may have some roots in it, but it hasn't got any plant in it, so it's bark. And I'm just going to knock as much of that off as I can, give it a good shake and see what comes off, and possibly even put it back in the same pot, but push it right back against the pot. Yeah, so it won't get as much disturbance as a complete repot. There is another idea I could use, but I'm inclined not to, which would be to just take the whole pot and put it in a bigger pot. The problem is it would have to be a hell of a big pot. because the clay pot itself is quite thick, yeah? So that its overall width is quite a lot bigger than the width of the inside of the pot because of the thickness of the clay. Now, if I had a pot an inch bigger, that's a big pot, and all I've gained is an inch of media around the outside. That's not a lot, is it? So I'd have to go even bigger to get a reasonable amount of media and give that plant another couple of years worth. And eventually it's still going to have to come out. The only way not to do it is to sacrifice the pot and shatter it. And I'm not prepared to do that. So yes, I will be dealing with it, but not until those new roots come. And therefore I don't have to make the decision until the new roots come. So that's what's happening with that. Right, that was not a bad session. Some interesting stuff in there. And as usual, what I'm doing, I'm not sure it does a lot of good, because I am very aware that the majority of people do not read descriptions on people's videos, because if they did, there'd be a lot of questions that didn't get asked because they're in the description. Not just on mine, I'm on about, generally speaking, YouTube orchid videos. There's some good descriptions in videos that are just never getting read. And some of that is informative, often with links to other things. You're missing out not reading the descriptions. Some descriptions shortens, here is another video. That's your lot. There's not a lot to read. It's in the video. You watch it and listen to it, which is what most people do. But and I know on smaller screens, things like phones and stuff, it's fiddly trying to read the description. You know, there's a lot of it. You've got to blow it up and scroll up through, and it's a bit of a faff, isn't it? So I understand it. But in this description, I list out, in the viewers' questions, I list out the subjects talked about, the subjects covered. Yeah? That's helping me as well as other people, because it'll help YouTube on the searches. If somebody's doing a search and it hits some of the text that's in my subjects covered, it'll bring people into that video. Well, that's good, because they get a result from their search and I perhaps get somebody new. So it works both ways. So it's worth the effort on my part to put that in the description. But most of the people who watch my videos won't have read the description. They'll have watched the video before they even think about reading the description. You might go off and read it now because I've mentioned it. It's too late now. You've already heard it all. You don't need to read it now. So, yeah, descriptions on videos are often wasted, with some good stuff in there as well. So that's that. Right, that's it for today. I've now got to go and do battle with that car. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to open the door and back up, because you get that heat surge, don't you? and then I'll go and open all the windows and shut the door back up and come indoors and let some of that heat dissipate a bit before I have to go and do battle with it. It's an old car. That's all I could afford when I lost the other one. Because normally when you change cars, you get some money for your old one, don't you? Well, I had to scrap mine because it was just useless. So I lost the Saab and had to put all of the money up front for a car, which I didn't have a lot of at the time. So it's quite an old car. So the air conditioning blows air around. I wouldn't say it cools it that much. So I'm going to have to put up with quite warm air coming in as I'm driving along. Windows open, force 8 gale, do what I can. And maybe I'll do that trip out tomorrow to these. These are rather special. Most of our native British orchids are like the ones I showed in my last visit, my last trip out. They're a column. They're like my one outside. They're a column of lots of tiny little flowers. Very pretty, but tiny. These orchids are bigger. And they look more like the sort of orchids we might have in here. But I haven't seen these yet. I've just found articles and one individual who said where they are. It's strange, I found these purely by chance when I was being nosy. I put the information about the nest cams that I was watching, especially the osprey nest in Poole Harbour. This is just up the road from me, you know, and I didn't even know ospreys were around on the south coast. I thought they were all Wales and Scotland. Now that nest has failed because a male hasn't turned up, which is a bit sad, but they're hoping that next year it might get going. But in reading about the area and also being nosy trying to work out where exactly the nest was, because it's not been disclosed and it's on private land, but I know roughly where it is. But in doing so, some of the articles I found said, crikey, they've got those orchids there. That sounds like this. It's not like an odd one or two. It sounds like there's quite a few in that one little area. So that's where we're off to. But unfortunately, Poole Harbour has got a lovely little ferry that goes across that you can queue for an hour and a half for. If it's even running with the current restrictions, I don't know. So I've got to go right round what is in effect the second largest natural harbour in the world. I've got to go all the way round because I can't get across. So it takes quite a while. But it could be worth it. So that's the planned trip for tomorrow. Whether it takes place or not, I don't know, because I'm not getting soaking wet. We shall see. So that's it for today. Hope you've enjoyed that session. These questions and answers seem popular. Obviously, some subjects are more of interest to some and others to others. But you know, that's how it goes. The questions are coming in from you people. And I think the answers could be of interest to more than just the one person who asked the question. So I'm happy to do them. So see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.